Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Holland IQ 2022 Global Impact Summits. I'm here with Jessie Soleil. We'll hear from Jessie in a moment. And I'm the Vice President of Global Insights at Holland IQ. It's my absolute pleasure to be talking with lots of really interesting people as part of the Africa Summit. And without further ado, I would love to pass over to Jessie Soleil, who is the President and co-founder of Akili Network. Jessie's going to say hi and just walk us through a little bit of background on Akili Network so we can get to know it better. And after that, we will move into a bit of Q&A. So let me take your slides back for you, Jessie.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Great. So as Lucy said, and Lucy, thank you for having me. As she said, my name is Jessie Soleil. I'm the president and co-founder of Akili Network. I've got a long history in digital and kids content, was at Scholastic for 10 years, developing educational technology products and consumer products. A lot of people ask, well, why Kenya? Why Africa? Why the heck would you do that? And part of that is because, well, my wife is actually from Kenya. So it became kind of evident about 20 years ago when I first started coming here that there was a pretty huge gap in the market. And so my business partner and I created Akili Network really because there wasn't anything for kids to watch. And especially when you think about who has televisions, who has access to televisions. TV is actually the biggest viewing platform on the continent and in the country of Kenya. So when you think about, well, isn't Kenya on the forefront of mobile? And the answer is absolutely, but not when it comes to consuming content. So things that we'll talk about, or that I'll take you through fairly quickly, is well, the fact that television reaches everyone, from the most wealthy to the least fortunate. And so we created Akili basically to become the educational Disney of Africa, with the hope that we would be able to develop wonderful local content, make sure that access to content is free, not through a paywall and not with the requirement of having to pay for internet, and that we would protect children with both a really protective advertising policy and ensuring that our communications policies and the programming that we use is always appropriate for kids and families. And when I say children, I mean anyone under the age of 18, even though teenagers don't like to be called children. We all know that they still are. So what I was talking about a second ago, about how we're reaching everyone through television, when you think about how people consume content and media, I think the number one thing to recognize is that just because in developed countries, in the US and the UK and Australia, we have pretty easy access to digital, and we can afford Wi-Fi at home. And even the least fortunate of us generally can use digital platforms. But across Africa, it's a little bit different. And really, when you think about how people get access to content, TV being the king, and the way that they get access, whether or not they get access to everything through pay TV if you're at the highest income, or you use free to air or basic pay services, or you even have a TV in the home, or you go to a community viewing area like a preschool or your friend's house to watch television. Everyone has access to it. And this isn't me saying this. This is data from some of our partners like Ipsos and Geopol, who have done research in the market for a very long time. So we thought, hey, wouldn't TV be smart? And in fact, it was great, because we launched Akili Kids 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, right when COVID hit. So about 3 weeks after the country was locked down and schools were closed and parents were at home, we were on free-to-air television, broadcasting on digital terrestrial TV and on the internet for those who would consume it that way. And we slowly expanded out to be on every single platform in the country, whether that's pay satellite, whether that's free-to-air, whether that's free through the internet, or partnerships with Safaricom and soon to be some of the other telcos in the area. One thing that I do want to also add while I'm on this slide is the idea of whole child education. And why is that important to us in Kenya and across Africa? Well, I think when you think about education, the perception is education is something that takes place in school and it's purely academic. And when we created Akili Kids, which is the channel that we launched, and the Akili Fan Block for the evenings, we imagined that we were a supplemental educational platform. For early childhood, we would have programming in the morning and in the evenings and late afternoon when other kids came home from school-age kids come home and they have something to watch. It's always fun, it's always interesting, but there's social emotional content, there's community content. It isn't just ABC 1, 2, 3, phonics, phonemic awareness, and other literacy strategies. So after 2 years, what's happened? Well, so Ipsos did this establishment survey a couple of months ago in July, and we found, or they found rather, that we were the most watched television channel in households with children, period. We beat Local Citizen, which is actually the #1 TV channel for everyone, and all of the usual suspects, Jim Jam, Nickelodeon, Disney, Cartoon Network. And why is that? Well, a big part of it is, yes, that we also have access to our platform via free-to-air terrestrial television. But the other thing is that we've developed a lot of local content, and the whole channel feels local. So everything from our station IDs and the breaks between programs, even if we've taken a program from an international source, we wrap local around it. So the whole thing feels like it's for you if you're Kenyan. About 10% of our content's in Kiswahili, 90% is English, and we've had no problems with people receiving and being interested in this content and being interested in the language choices that we've made. And just to reiterate, how do we reach all these people? Well, this is a good breakdown of kind of viewing time throughout the day. So Akili Kids in the morning for really young children, and that has academic programming, really preschool on television, school readiness, and whether or not you can recognize a pattern or a shape, basic phonics and phonemic awareness, word recognition, vocabulary, and yeah, simple math. And all of that is pulled together in the mornings when younger children are at home with caregivers. And you see a little dip here in the middle of the day where it says 7 and older. Well, right about this time is the news. 1 o'clock in the afternoon is when the news hits. And news is not something that we run on Akili. Yes, people leave, they go and watch half an hour of the news or an hour of the news, and then come back, and suddenly it's social emotional and Kiswahili programming, very purposeful. And you can see we build up over the day. And this peak right here is as kids start to come home from school, suddenly they grab the remote, turn on the television, and they watch Akili. And in the evenings, there is a bit of a decline. And this next spike you see over here where it says teens and families, we've done some really purposeful original content development for tweens and teens, and families are really interested in it. And then as the day progresses, into the evening, kids go to bed, and families still watch. And that's a remarkable win for us, because we really want to be the place where you can sit down and watch any program with your children, whether they're 3 or 6 or 17, as a family, and not have to worry about what might come up next. So I do want to talk a little bit about the impact. And this was a research study commissioned by Acumen, one of our investors. And they asked 60 Decibels, a lean data research company from the UK, to do a little bit of qualitative research. And they asked about 350 parents what they thought of and felt about Akili Kids and what it meant to their children and to them. And I think you'll see that not only was there a huge perceived quality of life change, but off to the right, on the top, you'll see there was a perception that academic performance has improved and the learning experiences have improved. And specifically speaking, you can see on the left bottom that they mentioned their children were better in math and science, that they learned new languages or were better at speaking. We have comments like, oh, my kid knows English now and is teaching me. And while none of this is actually, this wasn't necessarily the purpose, increased academic performance, I think the one thing that we all know from a whole child strategy is if a child is engaged and has a good time, that they're actually going to learn something. And so this isn't by any means kind of hard data from research in classrooms, but if a parent thinks that their kids are learning, I think they probably have a better idea than many others. And this last bit in the corner, access to alternatives. So there isn't anything else. I think this is a really important graph. If 97% of parents say that they don't know what they would do without us, I think that's pretty darn important. It means that we're doing not only a great job in terms of broadcasting great programs and entertaining and educating kids, but we are providing a service that really isn't being provided anywhere else. And I think that's all I wanted to present. I got a lot more I could talk about, but I'm sure we'll get into some of that with our questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jesse. That was super interesting. And I've been frantically taking notes on all of the things I wanted to come back to. I mean, I was really intrigued actually right at the start when you said, you know, when people think of developments in Africa and Kenya in particular, they go straight to mobile. And yet this is, you know, we talked about, you know, perceived to be a dying technology. Talk us through some of the intricacies. I mean, is mobile still potentially where this could go in the future, or what's going on with all those different spaces?
Absolutely. We're constantly looking at what consumption on mobile, media consumption on mobile looks like. But there are some things that I think I would love everyone to know, which is, number one, there is no app culture in this country. And that is similar in the majority of sub-Saharan Africa. So when people talk about, hey, I'm building an app, it's going to help people learn, it's going to reach the bottom of the pyramid, that's just not going to happen for several reasons. But first, culturally, it's just, I don't have room to download another thing onto my phone because I've got limited space. And by the way, I may not have a smartphone, even though, you know, the ownership of smartphones is increasing. My network may not be able to deliver rich media content, even if I can afford it. Even if I can afford it. So then you think about, well, how much does data cost? Well, data is darn expensive. And if you go back and look at some of the other platforms that are winning in Africa, let's talk about Facebook for a second. They're winning. And why are they winning? Because they have Facebook Lite. And Facebook Lite strips out all the video and the photos so people can basically WhatsApp each other through Facebook. And that has been the reason why that's been successful, why Facebook has been successful here. So it really is kind of a disconnect when you think about, okay, how am I going to get to people the most in need, the folks who are most in need? And the other challenge is people don't know implementation. They don't know when to use it. They don't know how to use it. So to give them a tool, even if it sounds really cool, parents who have the means don't know when it's time to give them the phone or the iPad. And so these are things that not even teachers here are really well versed in. I gotta say, working with Scholastic for 10 years, teachers in the US aren't versed with it. You've got to deliver a package with not only a great technology platform that runs all over the place in any different configuration, still Windows 95 in some schools in the US. So when we think about this advanced mindset and this advanced market, yeah, it's super advanced, but also it's not. So
Yeah.
let's not leave anything off the table if we're actually trying to reach kids and families.
Yeah. Oh, you mentioned schools a couple of times, and it occurred to me, how does this interact with what's happening in school, if at all?
Yeah, so I would say it doesn't really. What we try to do is shore up the edges around the school experience and make sure that sometimes school's not fun. And I got to tell you, reading is one of my favorite things in the world, and it has been since I was a child. And that's because we had a culture of reading in my house where there were books on the shelves, and I learned at Scholastic that that was the number one indicator if a child was going to read, was if there were books on the shelves. And if the parents read, you can read on your phone, you can read a newspaper, but it's still reading. But when reading is only assigned to you through your classroom, there's very little joy in that. So how can we take the reins off of some of those things that are absolutely strict and required by academic standards in schools and by the Ministry of Education, and make sure that, hey, you know what, guys? Yes, you've been assigned that, but this is still fun. And look at these guys having adventures over here with words and going into amazing literature that you may not have even thought about yet. So I do think that there is a huge opportunity to supplement the traditional education, but traditional education doesn't always value the creative. They don't always value the entertainment aspect of it, the performance art, I want to act, I want to sing, I want to dance. Those are all incredibly valuable, but it's not going to help you get an engineering degree. So I think these are the things where, yes, it's whole child. And that isn't necessarily something that school has adopted. So we're supplementing it.
Yeah. And obviously content is a big focus here. Content is a big focus for education and ed tech all over the world. It's often,
Yes.
featured in our startups around the world and in our landscapes. So I wonder if you can talk through in a bit more detail, where does the content come from? Who chooses it? How is it brought together? I mean, there's so much that could be in here.
Yeah, there is. Content's it's hard. And number one, I say it's hard because it's expensive. If you want to make new content, it costs money. Um, so in the tradition of many other television channels and networks, we've acquired a great deal of content from around the world. And we worked with our own internal team to make sure that it does three things. One, there is a learning outcome. And that learning outcome can be, hey, I won't bite my friends. That's a learning outcome. Not just did I walk away learning something. A lot of times learning happens and you don't realize it. And this is where, I would love someone to be entertained and watch the characters on TV talk about triangles and squares. And then they show up in first grade and someone goes, that's a triangle. And they know that. Why? I don't care if they know because they watched one of our programs. So what matters is they know it and they feel confident from it. So that comes a lot of times from acquisition. But that typically works really well with younger audiences, where I can pick up a great show from Canada or France, and that'll resonate with a 4 or 5-year-old pretty easily. But when you're a tween or you're a teen, you really want to see yourself. And so I think as you look at what is it that's important to me and how am I going to be entertained and how are these characters related to me in my living situations, that's where all the opportunity really is. So for example, we develop a lot of original content. We also work with great partners around the region. Ubongo is a great partner. We air a lot of their shows and programs. PVI, Peripheral Vision International, EVCL out of Nigeria, our great friends there, have given wonderful content and developed content that if you're African and you want great content, there aren't a lot of ways to get that done unless you do it as your side job, because you pay for it yourself. You pay for the development. Nobody teaches you how to make an animation Nobody teaches the education. You're kind of just pulling it together. And then when you get to a broadcaster, when you actually have a product, many times those broadcasters ask you to pay them to put your show on the air, even though they want kids content. So the business model for it is broken. And that's the other thing that really kind of is unsaid throughout all of this stuff is we're trying to help people produce great programs for their kids. But the one last thing that I'll say about programming for older children. So we just did a show called Flash Squad, which is about internet safety, and it's actually it's a comedy. It's a sitcom format with kids in the basement of a school who are helping other kids who are having problems like they're being bullied or their account's been hacked or they forgot their passwords, and they are walking through their peers on how to solve some of these problems. And it's fun and it's funny, but at the end of it, there's a moment where it's super directive, like, hey, you got in this situation, just remember these are the three things you need to do: report, block, and clean. And anyway, not only has it been super successful from a reception from the audience, but I think the critical nature of the content that we are able to create isn't being addressed, not just for African children. I haven't seen a show about internet safety for kids, period. And isn't that something that kids have to manage every single day? And particularly when they're forced online because of COVID and suddenly they're in Zoom and they've got Google and they're searching and they're chatting with their friends and then they're on a Discord server and then they're like, who's that guy? And then I'm being groomed. And then, I mean, it just doesn't stop. So where are the tools that you can arm them with that isn't a curriculum that a teacher needs to deliver? And again, this is where we can use content to teach people. And linear content is actually really, really important. Interactive is great, but linear is also super important.
Well, we could talk another half hour just on that content side of things, but you also said a couple of things. You were walking through some of your partners in other countries as well, and you've talked about Kenya, you've talked about scale, you talk about local context and that being important. So I wonder if you can expand a little bit on some of those, I guess, challenges, some of the wins in localizing, and then some of the challenges as you're starting to think beyond Kenya as well.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, free to air has been absolutely critical for Akili's success. Not just because, well, we think it's important to have more people watching us, but we really want to be able to reach the people who need this content the most. And every country has different qualifications and restrictions on free to air terrestrial broadcasting. So I think that's one of the big challenges, even in Kenya, where they love us, and the local authorities, they're like the FCC, the CAK, Communications Authority of Kenya, absolutely love us, but they have requirements that we have to meet constantly. And one of those requirements is 40% of our programming needs to be local. Now, I should also say that out of the 120 something other free to air broadcasters, only 17 have met that local content requirement, but we're being challenged by them to do more local, and we want to. But as I also mentioned, it's expensive to create content even here. So that's challenge number one. How do you do local in every adjacent country? How do you do local across sub-Saharan Africa? And so then that becomes a language kishu, a representation issue. And if I'm doing the channel in with Yoruba instead of Kiswahili, well, that represents a significant amount of additional effort and energy. But that's the thing that people locally in Nigeria are going to go, this is my channel. Because they don't say that about Disney, and they don't say that about Nick, and they may someday. I'm not, I don't want to say those guys are never going to try to come into sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, it's the opposite. I think once we crack the nut from a revenue perspective, it's going to make it a lot more attractive to find people who come in. But that said, local terrestrial broadcasting is not something that it's not for the faint of heart. it takes a lot of work. So I think if you just, those are probably the two biggest challenges. I can talk about more, but you want to also be able to source content from around the continent. And when I mentioned PVI, Peripheral Vision International, they have content creators and producers in many countries. And so they're pulling together resources, whether teacher resources or production resources, from Kenya, from Uganda, from all over Central Africa, and more people like that who are creating things that are really interesting and really engaging are also going to help our local strategy. So there are people who are thinking about this as well.
Yeah. Perfect segue. You said once we crack the nut from a revenue perspective, can you talk through the business model that sits behind all of this at the moment, and also perhaps where you'd like it to go?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's important to note we are very good friends with the people at Sesame Workshop and understand the nonprofit strategy for education. And it's our belief that if we want to make more content, you think about Netflix being able to invest millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in content. If we want to do more content, we're not going to do that with getting grants. So really, how are we going to create a for-profit model that thinks and acts like a nonprofit, but is actually out there trying to educate advertisers and to create great advertising that kids and families are going to be exposed to? I think it's important to note that advertising is just a fact of life. We're all going to be exposed to it, but there's two parts to it. One is I've got a great restrictive policy that says, hey, I'm not going to advertise candy, okay, which has not been an issue for anybody else. So other broadcasters will happily take that chewing gum that really will rot your kids' teeth. And by the way, there is no real focus at home on brushing your teeth. So without being cognizant that the money you're taking actually can damage families, not help them, we've turned down advertising, commercial advertising. So that's pillar number one. I want commercial advertising, but I want the right kind. And we're starting to get there. We're getting good things. Part of that's through CSR budgets, but it's commercial. The other is we're working with the large government agencies, NGOs, and foundations to create. Sometimes it's create content. Sometimes it's push out a PSA. COVID was a big moment where a lot of people got money. We didn't actually to air programs for kids to wash their hands. There are still things that are going on that we are now starting to participate in that really extend communications out into those markets. And by the way, those people are paying with their communications budgets to get these programs, these messages on television and reach the right audiences, which we are. And then it's the diversification of the other revenue streams. So we've partnered with Safaricom in Kenya, and they've launched a new platform called Bays. And we are the educational children's content provider for them. But much to the point that I made earlier about online media not being consumed, while they have 30 million subscribers, I won't tell you where they've netted out in terms of their current number of subscribers, but in 2 years, they have underperformed significantly. And part of that is just the culture of consuming content on a phone isn't here yet. Yeah. So we're looking at that. We're looking at licensing and merchandising opportunities and other diversification of revenue. But primary revenue streams right now are for-profit, is commercial and non-commercial advertising.
Yeah. Okay, you mentioned 2 years. Let's wrap this up with my gosh, it's been an incredible 2 years, and what an amazing amount of growth. So I guess a couple of things to finish with. What has helped and hindered over those last 2 years? And then where to next in an ideal world, and what will help you get there?
Right. Well, I often joke that when we were about to launch, if I was a God-fearing man, I would have prayed, help us launch this. And God said, I got just the thing and did a global pandemic and sent everybody home for a year. So that worked in our favor. You know, everyone else was stuck. It really helped our viewership. And so we got 4 times what we had projected in terms of our viewership that we had projected for 2025. So that's just how far we were able to go with that benefit. The downside, well, I'll go back to the revenue thing. It's been really hard to help people understand that there's a business here, and that kids are influencers, and they will tell their parents, they will help select what color car they're going to get, or tell them, hey, no, if I had a choice, I think you should get that. What food products they want, yes, I would rather have that than that, and that's, we've gotten feedback that it's true and it's working, and it's like, well, yeah, it's been working everywhere else for the last 30 years, so why can you be different? I think that's been our other challenge. I mean, there's been lots of others, but and just a lack of content. Like, being able to source African content has been a real hardship. There just isn't enough of it. We want more. And when I say there isn't enough, I'm saying there isn't enough at a level of quality that kids would deserve to be exposed to. So lots of people have been doing it in their backyards, in their garages, but they just haven't had training. They haven't had direction. They don't understand what it means to even, hey, let's do a series Bible. Let's write out what this thing is supposed to be, and what it's supposed to do. So I think those have been probably the biggest challenges. And yeah, COVID, what a great help.
Yeah, and it's interesting as you're wrapping up there. It feels like the opportunities go even way beyond just Akili Network. You know, potentially we're reaching out to upskilling an entire future population of content creators and you know, people who will help this become a reality, right?
It's true. One of the things strategically that I've been wanting to invest in is a nonprofit part of this, which is a content laboratory where we can invite creators from all across the continent to tell us what they want, what stories they want to talk about, what's important to their families, and then give them the tools and the direction to be able to make some of this content, and then be a place where we're not asking them to pay us to air it, you know, where they can actually financially participate in the success of a program as we are successful. So I think there are very few people who are giving all of the talent across the continent the ability to create and distribute what they make.
Yeah.
And I want to be that.
Yeah. What a great note to finish on. I can't wait to see what happens if you do that much in 2 years. I can't imagine where you'll be in 10, but I know people will be watching and seeing what's happening. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through the story. Any final things you'd like to share?
Just thank you for the well wishes, and yeah, we're going to need luck, but we have an amazing team here. We have amazing partners, and I think the thing is, if you imagine that Africa is still a space where you know, the way to get to kids is through an app, then I think that will be true in 10 years, but that's not true today. And so dispel your belief about what happens in your own country and think about what's happening here and what user behaviors, what families deal with every day. And you may just change your mind, and we'll be your partner if you want to reach people.
Beautiful. On those words, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Jesse Soleil from Akili Network, and we will keep an eye on you for sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucy. It was lovely to be here.